The emergency beacon cut through the silence of deep space like a knife through silk. Ambassador Sarah Chan was reviewing trade agreements in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge when the urgent chime echoed through the ship's corridors. She dropped her tablet and rushed to the bridge, her diplomatic training kicking in instantly. "Report," she called to Captain Martinez as she entered the command center. "Unknown vessel. Dead in space about 2 light minutes from our position," Martinez replied, his weathered face creased with concern. "The distress signal is unusual. It's not following any known protocol, but the universal translator is picking up fragments." Sarah moved to the communications console, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The static-filled transmission crackled to life, and through the interference, she could hear something that made her blood run cold. Desperation so raw it transcended species barriers. "Please." The voice was deep, resonant but broken with pain. "I cannot, my wings, my legs. Please, someone help me." The communication officer, Lieutenant Torres, looked up from her station. "Ambassador." "We're getting life sign readings. One large biosignature, definitely not human. The ship appears to be some kind of organic metallic hybrid construction we've never seen before." Sarah's mind raced. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for only 15 years, still considered newcomers by species that had been trading and warring among the stars for millennia. Most of their diplomatic encounters had been formal, structured affairs in council chambers or space stations. A rescue mission involving an unknown species was completely outside protocol. "Captain, how long would it take to reach them?" she asked. Martinez consulted his navigation officer. "About 40 minutes at maximum burn. But, Ambassador, we don't know what we're dealing with. This could be a trap, or we might be exposing ourselves to unknown pathogens or technology." Sarah understood his caution. Humanity's relatively recent entry into galactic politics had been marked by both remarkable successes and devastating mistakes. They had earned respect for their diplomatic innovation and their unusual willingness to find peaceful solutions, but they were still viewed with suspicion by many older civilizations who couldn't understand humanity's seemingly irrational compassion for other species. The voice. Sarah paused, replaying the transmission. "There's something about it. Run a psychological analysis through our emotion recognition protocols. The ship's artificial intelligence, ARIA, processed the request in seconds. Analysis complete, Ambassador. The vocal patterns indicate extreme physical distress, genuine fear, and what human psychology would classify as despair. There is no indication of deception or hostile intent. However, I should note that my analysis is based on human emotional markers, which may not apply to this unknown species." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Sarah felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. As the senior diplomatic officer, the decision was ultimately hers. She could order them to continue on their scheduled route to the Centauri Trade Summit, following the safe, predictable path that humanity had carefully carved out in galactic politics, or she could authorize a rescue mission that might put her crew at risk for a being they knew nothing about. She thought of the oath she had taken when she joined the diplomatic corps, to extend the hand of friendship and aid to all sentient beings, regardless of their form or origin. At the time, it had seemed like beautiful but largely theoretical words. Now, those words carried the weight of real consequence. "Captain, set course for the distressed vessel. Maximum burn." Martinez nodded grimly. "Aye, Ambassador. All hands, prepare for emergency rescue operations." As the Harmony's Edge altered course, Sarah found herself staring out at the stars, wondering what they would find. The universal translator had managed to parse more of the transmission during their conversation, and the fragments it captured painted a disturbing picture. "Cannot move, wings broken, spine damaged, my people. They will think me dead. Treaty, so important, cannot fail." A treaty. Sarah's diplomatic instincts sharpened. Whatever this being was, it wasn't just a random traveler in distress. It was some kind of representative, possibly carrying out a mission as important as her own. The implications were staggering. Arya, scan our databases for any reference to treaties involving species with flight capabilities and reptilian characteristics, she ordered. Searching. Ambassador, I'm finding references to the Drakmari Collective in several recent Council intelligence briefings. They're described as a powerful but reclusive empire that has been in isolation for nearly a century. Recent reports suggest they may be preparing to rejoin galactic society. Sarah's pulse quickened. The Drakmari Collective controlled a significant portion of the galaxy's rare mineral resources, particularly the quantum crystals essential for faster-than-light communication. Their return to galactic politics could reshape the balance of power among the Council species. If this being is a Drakmari diplomat, she murmured, then this rescue could be the most important moment in recent human diplomatic history. The minutes ticked by as they closed the distance to the distressed vessel. Sarah used the time to review everything humanity knew about the Drakmari, which wasn't much. They were described as large, powerful beings with natural flight capabilities and advanced biotechnology. Their isolation had been voluntary, triggered by what Council records vaguely referred to as philosophical differences with prevailing galactic attitudes toward physical disability. As they approached the vessel, the details became clearer on the view screen. The ship was unlike anything in human experience, a seamless fusion of what appeared to be living tissue and crystalline technology. It was beautiful in an alien way, with graceful curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built. But the beauty was marred by obvious damage. Sections of the hull showed massive impact scars, and several wing-like protrusions that might have been solar collectors or navigation arrays hung limp and broken. Life support appears to be failing, Torres reported. Atmospheric readings are inconsistent, and I'm detecting multiple hull breaches. The distress signal crackled to life again, weaker now, but still audible. Please, if anyone can hear this, I am Ambassador Keeltharian of the Drakmari Collective. My ship was struck by debris from an asteroid field. I am injured. I cannot pilot my vessel, and life support is failing. If any being receives this message, I beg you, please help me complete my mission. The treaty with the Council. It must not fail because of my weakness. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest at the word weakness. There was a cultural weight to that word, a shame that went beyond simple physical injury. She was beginning to understand why the Drakmari had isolated themselves. Ambassador, Captain Martinez called from the tactical station. We're within transporter range, but I'm not reading any compatible technology on their vessel. We'll have to dock manually or use the shuttle. Prepare the shuttle, Sarah decided. I'm going over personally. Ambassador, with respect, that's not advisable. We have no idea what kind of environment we're entering or what this being is capable of. Sarah was already moving toward the shuttle bay. Captain, if this is truly a Drakmari ambassador, then this is a first contact situation that could determine humanity's relationship with one of the galaxy's major powers. And if it's just a being in distress. She paused at the doorway to the bridge. Then, it's our duty as sapient beings to help. The Shuttle Dove was humanity's most advanced diplomatic transport, equipped with environmental suits capable of adapting to a wide range of atmospheric conditions and a medical bay that could theoretically treat unknown alien physiology. As Sarah ran through her pre-flight checks, she found herself thinking about humanity's unique position in galactic society. Most species, she had learned, approached interstellar relations with a mixture of caution and calculation. Alliances were formed based on mutual benefit. Aid was extended when it served strategic purposes, and compassion was considered a luxury that few civilizations could afford in the harsh realities of galactic politics. Humanity was different, not because they were inherently better or worse than other species, but because their evolutionary history had shaped them in unusual ways. They had evolved as social creatures who succeeded through cooperation and mutual aid, even with those outside their immediate genetic group. What other species saw as strategic weakness, humans saw as moral strength. The docking procedure with the Drachmarie vessel proved challenging. The ship's biomechanical nature meant that traditional docking clamps couldn't establish a proper seal. Sarah had to manually pilot the shuttle into what appeared to be a natural docking cavity that dilated to accept her vessel like some kind of mechanical organism. The atmosphere beyond the airlock was thin and carried an ozone-like scent that made her grateful for her environmental suit. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own organic rhythm. Following the life sign readings on her scanner, Sarah made her way deeper into the vessel. She found Ambassador Kiltharian in what appeared to be the ship's command center, and the sight stopped her cold. The being was magnificent even in his injured state. Easily 3 meters long, with iridescent scales that shifted from deep blue to silver in the emergency lighting. His body was clearly designed for both terrestrial movement and flight, with powerful limbs and wing structures that would have been breathtaking when fully extended. But those wings hung at unnatural angles, clearly broken, and his back legs showed signs of severe trauma. Most disturbing was the way he lay completely motionless except for his breathing. When he saw her approach, his large, intelligent eyes widened with what she could only interpret as shock. You are not Drachmarie," he said, his voice carrying that same resonant quality she had heard in the transmission. But now she could see the effort each word cost him. "I am Ambassador Sarah Chun of the Human Federation," she replied, activating her suit's external speakers. "I received your distress call. I'm here to help." Kiltharian's eyes, Sarah noticed, were remarkably expressive. In them, she saw a complex mixture of hope, fear, and something that might have been shame. "Human, I have heard of your species. You are the new members of the Council." "That's right. Can you tell me the extent of your injuries?" The great dragon's head moved slightly, the only movement he seemed capable of. "My spine is damaged. I cannot move my wings or my lower body. In Drachmarie culture, this means—" He paused, struggling with more than just physical pain. "This means I am no longer whole. I am weak, broken." Sarah knelt beside him, close enough to see the pain in his eyes, but careful not to touch without permission. "From a human perspective, you're injured, not broken. Injuries can be treated, healed, or adapted to. Would you allow me to examine you with my medical scanner?" "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you help me? I am not of your species. My failure to complete this mission gains you nothing. In fact, if the Drachmarie Treaty fails, it might benefit humanity's position in the Council." Sarah considered her answer carefully. This was clearly a being from a culture where physical capability was deeply tied to worth and social standing. Her next words could determine not just his fate, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the Drachmarie Collective. "In human culture," she said finally, "we have a saying, we are all more alike than we are different. You're hurt, you're afraid, and you're trying to do something important for your people. Those are things I understand, regardless of what species we are. And helping you isn't about gain or strategy. It's about doing what's right." Kiltharian stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah thought she saw something shift in his expression. "Your species is very strange," he said, "but perhaps that is not a weakness." Sarah smiled, though she knew he couldn't see it through her helmet. "My medical scanner is detecting spinal trauma, but nothing that looks irreparable. My ship has a medical bay with technology that might be able to help. Will you let's try?" The Dragon Ambassador closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected. Hope. "Ah, yes. But you must understand, even if you can heal my body, my people may not accept what I have become." "A Drachmarie who cannot fly is still a Drachmarie," Sarah interrupted gently, "and still the ambassador they chose for this mission. Let's focus on getting you healthy and worry about the rest later." As she began the process of preparing him for transport to her ship, Sarah found herself thinking about the implications of this moment. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a first contact situation that could reshape galactic politics. More importantly, it was a chance to show the galaxy something about humanity that couldn't be communicated in formal diplomatic chambers. Sometimes the most important treaties weren't signed with documents and ceremonies. Sometimes they were written in moments of compassion between strangers among the stars. The transport back to the Harmony's edge required careful coordination. Kiltharian's size and the sensitivity of his injuries meant that Sarah had to use the shuttle's emergency medical transport system, essentially turning the entire passenger compartment into a mobile life support unit. Throughout the journey, the Dragon Ambassador drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever he was awake, his eyes tracked to Sarah with an expression she was beginning to recognize as wonder. "You risk much for a stranger," he murmured during one lucid moment. "That's what strangers are for," Sarah replied. "To give us the chance to become something more." As the Harmony's edge came into view through the shuttle's viewport, Sarah realized that whatever happened next, this moment had already changed something fundamental. Not just between humans and Drakmarie, but in her own understanding of what diplomacy really meant. Sometimes the most important negotiations happen not in conference rooms, but in the quiet spaces between hope and despair, where compassion could build bridges that no treaty could ever construct. Dr. Elena Vasquez had seen many unusual cases during her 15 years as the chief medical officer aboard diplomatic vessels. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of Ambassador Kiltharian being carefully transferred into her medical bay. The Drakmarie's massive form filled the specially adapted surgical suite, his iridescent scales catching the sterile lighting in ways that made him appear almost ethereal despite his obvious pain. Preliminary scans show severe spinal compression at the junction between his torso and wing assemblies, Dr. Vasquez reported to Ambassador Chun, who stood beside the medical table with an expression of deep concern. The neural pathways controlling his lower extremities and flight appendages have been significantly damaged, but not severed. There's hope for recovery with the right treatment. Kiltharian's eyes tracked between the two humans, and Sarah could see the intelligent assessment happening behind his gaze. Even injured and vulnerable, the Dragon Ambassador was clearly evaluating every detail of his situation with the keen mind that had made him a diplomatic representative of his people. "Your medical technology," he said, his voice stronger now that they had stabilized his life support systems. "It operates on principles similar to what we use, but your approach seems different." Dr. Vasquez activated the medical bay's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional representation of Kiltharian's spinal structure. The damage was clearly visible as areas of red and yellow highlighting along what appeared to be a remarkably complex nervous system. Human medicine has always been focused on adaptation and recovery rather than replacement, she explained. We tend to ask, how can we help this being heal, rather than how can we make this being the same as before? Would you be willing to let me attempt a treatment protocol? Sarah noticed something fascinating in Kiltharian's reaction. Instead of the immediate acceptance she might have expected from someone in his desperate situation, the Dragon Ambassador seemed to be wrestling with internal conflict. "In Drakmarie society," he said slowly, "there's a concept called wholeness integrity. It means that a being's worth and capability are measured by their physical completeness. A warrior who loses an arm becomes unsuitable for combat. A diplomat who cannot fly becomes—" He paused, struggling with the words. "Becomes less than what they were meant to be." Dr. Vasquez exchanged a glance with Ambassador Chun. This wasn't just about healing physical injuries. They were dealing with deep cultural assumptions about disability and worth. "May I ask," Sarah said carefully, "how this philosophy developed among your people?" Kiltharian's great head turned toward her, and she could see memories playing out behind his ancient eyes. The Drakmarie evolved on a world with extreme vertical geography. Our civilization developed in mountain ranges where flight was not just convenient. It was essential for survival. Those who could not fly, could not participate in society, could not defend territory, could not even reach the places where important decisions were made. Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. So physical capability became directly linked to social participation. That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. But I'm curious, how has this philosophy adapted as your people develop technology that could supplement physical abilities? It has not adapted well, Keeltharian admitted. When we first encountered other spacefaring civilizations, we found their attitudes toward what you might call disability disturbing. The idea that beings with physical limitations could still contribute meaningfully to society seemed to us like denying reality. We withdrew from galactic society partly because we could not reconcile our understanding of natural order with the Council's policies of inclusion. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The Council's universal accessibility mandates. That's what drove the Drachmarie to isolation. Among other things, yes. The requirement that all Council facilities, vessels, and diplomatic protocols accommodate beings with various physical limitations struck us as weakness masquerading as virtue. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft humming of monitoring equipment. Sarah realized they were at a crucial moment, not just in terms of medical treatment, but in terms of cultural understanding. How they handled this situation could determine whether the Drachmarie remained isolated for another century. Keeltharian, she said, would you be willing to consider that there might be different ways of understanding strength and capability? The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean, Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her medical scanner showing real-time data about Keeltharian's physiology. In human medicine, we've learned that adaptation often creates capabilities that surpass original function. A human who loses their sight often develops enhanced hearing and spatial awareness that allows them to navigate environments in ways that sighted humans cannot. A person who uses mobility aids often develops upper body strength and coordination that exceeds normal human parameters. You're suggesting that disability can be strength? Keeltharian's tone carried a mix of skepticism and curiosity. I'm suggesting, Sarah replied, that different capabilities create different types of strength. Let me tell you about someone from our history, a human scientist named Stephen Hawking. He developed a condition that gradually paralyzed his entire body, leaving him unable to move or speak without technological assistance. By your people's standards, he would have been considered fundamentally diminished. She activated her personal data pad, showing images and scientific diagrams. But Professor Hawking's physical limitations forced him to develop new ways of thinking about complex problems. Unable to write equations or manipulate instruments in traditional ways, he learned to work out incredibly complex mathematical relationships entirely in his mind. This led him to insights about the nature of the universe that revolutionized human understanding of physics. Keeltharian stared at the information, his expression unreadable. One individual case does not constitute a pattern. You're right, Dr. Vasquez agreed. But let me show you something else. She brought up a series of medical files on the holographic display. These are records from our last 5 years of diplomatic missions. In that time, we've encountered 12 different species with various forms of what they initially considered disability. In every case, we found that these individuals had developed unique perspectives and capabilities that proved invaluable to their societies once their cultures learned to recognize and utilize them. She highlighted specific cases. An aquatic species Diplomat who had lost their natural sonar abilities, but developed unprecedented skills in visual pattern recognition that revolutionized their people's art and communication. An insectoid ambassador who was born without wings, but became the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies psychology because their ground-based perspective gave them insights that their flying colleagues couldn't achieve. The pattern we've observed, Sarah added, is that limitation in one area often drives innovation and excellence in others. But only if a society is willing to value different types of contribution. Keeltharian was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, he spoke. Your species has a very different relationship with adaptation than mine does. We've had to, Sarah admitted. Humans evolved as a species that survived through cooperation and innovation rather than through superior physical capabilities. We learned early that every individual's unique perspective and abilities could contribute to group survival, even if, especially if, those abilities were different from the norm. And this philosophy has served you well in galactic politics. Dr. Vasquez smiled. Ambassador Chun, would you like to tell him about the Xerian trade dispute? Sarah felt a flush of pride as she recalled one of humanity's most significant diplomatic successes. 3 years ago, two major trading civilizations, the Xerions and the Beltar Consortium, were on the brink of war over resource allocation in a disputed system. The Council had been trying to mediate for months with no success. What did humans do differently? Keeltharian asked. We included beings in our negotiation team that the other species had overlooked. A Xerian who was deaf and communicated primarily through biochemical signals instead of sound. A Beltar who had mobility limitations and used technological assistance for transportation. These individuals understood their respective cultures from perspectives that the traditional diplomats missed. Sarah warmed to the story. The deaf Xerian recognized that the real issue wasn't resource scarcity. It was that the biochemical communication methods his people used for sensitive negotiations were being interpreted as threat displays by the Beltar. The Beltar team member understood that her people's protective formations, designed to accommodate beings with various mobility needs, were being seen as military positioning by the Xerions. And this led to resolution. Complete resolution within 2 weeks of including these perspectives. Not only did we avoid a war, but both civilizations established new trade protocols that have increased their mutual prosperity by 40%. Dr. Vasquez pulled up another display showing Keeltharian's current neural activity. Your brain scans show remarkable activity in areas we associate with pattern recognition and strategic thinking. My hypothesis is that your current injury, while traumatic, might actually enhance certain cognitive capabilities as your neural pathways adapt. You want to study me, Keeltharian said, but there was no accusation in his tone, just observation. I want to heal you, Dr. Vasquez corrected, and in the process, perhaps help you discover capabilities you didn't know you had. Sarah moved closer to the medical table. Keeltharian, there's something else you should know. The reason we were in this sector wasn't random. We were heading to a council summit where the primary topic was going to be renewed outreach to the Drachmarie Collective. The dragon's eyes widened. The council wishes to resume contact. The council needs to resume contact. The galaxy is facing challenges that require the unique perspectives and resources that your people possess. But more than that, many council members have come to realize that the Drachmarie withdrawal represented a failure of imagination on their part. In what way? Ambassador Chin brought up her diplomatic files on the medical bay's secondary display. When the Council first established the universal accessibility mandates, they were focused on accommodation, changing environments to include beings with disabilities. They didn't consider the possibility that those beings might not want accommodation so much as they wanted recognition of their different types of value. The Council has evolved, Sarah continued, partly because of humanity's influence, but mostly because they've seen the practical benefits of what we call diversity of perspective. Systems that include different types of thinking and different types of capability are more resilient, more innovative, and more successful than homogeneous ones. Keeltharian was quiet for a long moment. And if I accept your treatment, and if it successfully restores some of my mobility, you believe this could influence my people's willingness to rejoin galactic society? I believe, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, that if your people could see that other civilizations have learned to value different types of strength, it might change their perspective on what they see as the Council's weakness. But more importantly, Sarah added, if your mission succeeds, if you're able to complete your diplomatic objectives despite your injuries, it might change your people's perspective on what they see as their own weakness. The implications hung in the air like a charged field. This wasn't just a medical case or even a diplomatic crisis. It was a pivotal moment that could reshape how an entire civilization understood capability, worth, and strength. "I need to ask you something," Keeltharian said finally. "If your treatment is successful, but I remain unable to fly in the traditional Drachmary manner, would you consider that success or failure?" Dr. Vasquez looked at Ambassador Chun, who nodded encouragingly. "I would consider it success if you can return to your people as an effective ambassador who accomplished his mission. How you move through the world, whether through flight, ground locomotion, or technological assistance, would be irrelevant to that success. Even if it means I would be the first Drachmary diplomat in our history who could not fly. Especially if it means that," Sarah said firmly. "Because you would also be the first Drachmary diplomat to show the galaxy that your people's value doesn't depend on maintaining ancient physical standards, but on your intelligence, wisdom, and dedication to your society's welfare." Keeltharian's great head settled back against the medical table's support system. When he spoke, his voice carried a new quality, not just hope but determination. "Dr. Vasquez, Ambassador Chun, I place myself in your care not just as a patient, but as a representative of my people. If you can help me find new ways to be strong, perhaps together we can help the galaxy find new ways to understand strength itself." As Dr. Vasquez began preparing for the complex neural restoration procedure, Sarah found herself thinking about the profound irony of the situation. They had set out to rescue a stranded diplomat, but they might actually be rescuing an entire civilization from the isolation created by their own limiting beliefs about capability and worth. The real question now was whether they could succeed not just in healing Keeltharian's body, but in demonstrating that strength could take forms that the galaxy had never imagined. The neural restoration procedure took 18 hours, with Dr. Vasquez and her team working in shifts to maintain the delicate balance of biochemistry and bioelectronics that Keeltharian's physiology required. Ambassador Sarah Chun remained in the medical bay throughout the entire process, partly out of diplomatic necessity, but mostly because she found herself genuinely invested in the Dragon Ambassador's recovery. During the long hours of surgery, she learned more about Drachmary physiology than she had ever expected to know. Their neural systems operated on a fascinating combination of electrochemical signals and quantum entanglement effects that allowed for incredibly fast reflexes and coordination, essential for a species that navigated three-dimensional aerial environments at high speeds. But this same sophistication made their nervous systems both remarkably adaptable and surprisingly vulnerable to damage. "The good news," Dr. Vasquez reported as she emerged from the final surgical phase, "is that his neural pathways are responding better than expected to our restoration techniques. We've managed to re-establish basic connectivity to his lower extremities and wing structures." "And the bad news?" Sarah asked, though she could read the complexity in the doctor's expression. "The damage was extensive enough that full recovery to his previous capabilities is unlikely. He'll regain significant mobility, but his flight capabilities will be limited. More importantly, for his diplomatic mission, the recovery process is going to take several weeks, longer than his original timeline allowed." Sarah felt the weight of implications settling on her shoulders. The Council Summit, where Keeltharian was supposed to present the Drachmary's terms for rejoining galactic society, was scheduled to begin in just 10 days. If he missed that window, it might be years before another opportunity arose, and the Drachmary leadership might interpret his absence as a sign that renewed contact with the galaxy was too dangerous to pursue. "Has he regained consciousness yet?" she asked. "He's been drifting in and out, but I expect him to be fully lucid within the next few hours. I should warn you, though, when he discovers the extent of his limitations, there may be significant psychological impact. His culture's attitude toward physical capability means he might view partial recovery as worse than no recovery at all." As if summoned by their conversation, a soft sound from the medical table indicated that Keeltharian was stirring. His great eyes opened slowly, taking several moments to focus on his surroundings before settling on Sarah and Dr. Vasquez. "How do I?" He began, then stopped, moving his head carefully from side to side. For the first time since they had found him, Sarah could see him testing his body's responses, checking systems that had been offline for days. "Take it slowly," Dr. Vasquez advised. "Your neural pathways are still integrating the repairs we've made. Try moving your right wing first, just a small motion." Keeltharian's expression was intensely concentrated as he focused on the request. After several seconds, the wing structure closest to Sarah moved slightly, lifting a few inches from the medical table before settling back down. The motion was clearly labored and limited, but it was movement. "I can feel it," he said, wonder and frustration mingling in his voice. "But it's different. Weaker." "That's to be expected," Dr. Vasquez said. "The pathways need time to fully reconnect and strengthen. Now try your legs." This attempt was more successful. Both of Keeltharian's powerful hind limbs responded with movements that, while careful and obviously effortful, were clearly functional. "I can move," he said, and Sarah heard something breaking in his voice. Relief, certainly, but also grief for what had been lost. "You can move," she confirmed. "The question is, what do you want to do with that movement?" Keeltharian's eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "I want to complete my mission. But, Ambassador Chun, I need to understand something. How long have I been unconscious?" Sarah felt her heart sink. "Including the rescue and surgery time, about 4 days. 4 days." Keeltharian was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating. "The Council Summit begins in 6 days. Even if I could travel immediately, I would arrive with no time to prepare, no opportunity to establish the preliminary connections that diplomatic protocol requires." "That's true according to standard diplomatic approaches," Sarah agreed. "But what if we approached this differently?" Dr. Vasquez excused herself to check on other patients, leaving Sarah alone with the slowly recovering ambassador. She pulled up a chair beside his medical table, settling in for what she sensed would be a crucial conversation. "Keeltharian, may I ask what your original plan for the summit was?" The dragon considered this. "Standard procedure. Arrive early to establish residence in appropriate quarters. Spend several days in preliminary meetings with key council representatives to gauge their attitudes and negotiate preliminary positions. Present formal drachmary terms during the official session. Defend those terms against counterproposals. Return to my people with either an acceptable agreement or a clear understanding of why agreement was impossible. And all of this required your physical presence in the traditional manner. Of course, drachmary diplomacy is highly dependent on presence and bearing. Our negotiation style relies heavily on what you might call dominance establishment, demonstrating strength, capability, and authority through physical presence and movement." Sarah leaned forward. "What if I told you that some of the galaxy's most successful diplomatic negotiations in recent years have been conducted by representatives who didn't fit traditional models of authority and presence?" Keeltharian's expression shifted to one of skeptical interest. "Explain." 3 months ago, the Crystalline Coalition sent a representative to negotiate a major territorial dispute with the Gas Giant Federation. Their ambassador was a being who existed as distributed consciousness across multiple small crystal fragments. No central body, no traditional physical presence at all. Initially, the Gas Giant representatives were insulted, thinking the coalition was sending an incomplete negotiator. And what happened? The crystal ambassador's distributed nature meant it could simultaneously observe and analyze every participant in the negotiation from multiple angles and perspectives. It detected subtle chemical signals and energy patterns that indicated stress, deception, and genuine interest in ways that no single perspective negotiator ever could. The result was the most comprehensive and successful territorial agreement in that sector's history. Sarah brought up her datapad, showing recordings from various council sessions. Or consider the trade negotiations led by the Hive Queen Zura 7. She's from a species where individual identity is subordinated to collective decision-making. Traditional diplomatic theory suggested she would be ineffective because she lacked individual authority. Instead, her ability to rapidly consult with thousands of perspectives and synthesize complex information made her the most sought-after trade mediator in the galaxy. Keeltharian studied the images and data she presented. You're suggesting that non-traditional approaches to diplomacy can be more effective than traditional ones. I'm suggesting that effectiveness in diplomacy comes from understanding, intelligence, and genuine commitment to finding solutions, not from conforming to ancient models of authority. But my people's negotiation style might be exactly what the galaxy needs to hear, especially if it's presented in a new way that demonstrates the Drachmary's ability to adapt and evolve. Sarah stood and began pacing, her mind racing with possibilities. Keeltharian, what if missing the traditional summit timeline isn't a disaster, but an opportunity? What if instead of trying to fit into existing diplomatic frameworks, you pioneered a new approach that could actually be more effective? I don't understand. The Council Summit format is ancient. Hundreds of representatives gathering in formal chambers to deliver prepared statements and negotiate according to rigid protocols. It's efficient for routine business, but it's terrible for addressing fundamental philosophical differences like the ones between the Drachmary and the rest of galactic society. She turned back to face him. What if, instead of showing up to present traditional Drachmary positions in a traditional format, you demonstrated a new model of Drachmary capability? What if you showed the galaxy that your people can innovate, adapt, and approach old problems in new ways? Keeltharian's eyes were following her movements, clearly engaged despite his skepticism. And how would I do that? By arriving exactly as you are now, recovering, adapting, but absolutely committed to finding solutions. By demonstrating that Drachmary's strength isn't just about physical dominance, but about intelligence, determination, and the ability to overcome obstacles. Sarah's excitement was building as the plan took shape in her mind. Instead of preliminary meetings designed to establish dominance, what if you arranged individual sessions with key council members designed to understand their actual concerns and interests? Instead of formal presentations defending predetermined positions, what if you facilitated collaborative problem-solving sessions? You're talking about completely abandoning established diplomatic protocol. I'm talking about establishing new diplomatic protocols that are actually designed to achieve understanding rather than just to display power. Keeltharian was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing considerations that Sarah could only guess at. Finally, he spoke. Even if I agreed to such an approach, my current condition would make many aspects of traditional negotiation impossible. I cannot engage in the ritual flights that demonstrate strength. I cannot position myself in ways that establish physical authority. Then we find new ways to demonstrate strength and establish authority, Sarah said firmly. Keeltharian, may I make a proposal that might sound radical? At this point, radical might be exactly what the situation requires. What if I formally requested that the Human Federation be allowed to serve as host for the Drachmary reintegration negotiations? Instead of trying to fit into the Council's existing summit structure, we could design a completely new format specifically tailored to address the unique challenges of bringing the Drachmary back into galactic society. The Dragon Ambassador's head tilted slightly. A gesture Sarah was learning indicated intense focus. You would stake your people's diplomatic reputation on my ability to succeed in an untested format. I would stake our reputation on our shared belief that the galaxy benefits when civilizations find new ways to work together instead of just repeating old patterns. And if I fail, if my people view this deviation from tradition as confirmation that contact with the galaxy leads to abandonment of proper Drachmary values. Sarah met his gaze directly. Then, we will have failed together, attempting something worthy. But Kiltharian, what if you succeed? What if you return to your people not as a diplomat who was broken and diminished by contact with the galaxy, but as one who discovered new forms of strength that the Drachmarie never knew they possessed? The medical bay fell silent except for the quiet humming of monitoring equipment. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out in Kiltharian's expression, the weight of cultural expectations warring with the possibility of transformation. Ambassador Chun, he said finally, if we pursue this path, I need you to understand something. Should this approach fail, the consequences will extend far beyond our individual careers. The Drachmarie leadership will likely interpret failure as confirmation that galactic society corrupts and weakens those who engage with it. They may withdraw from contact for another century or more. I understand, Sarah replied. But I also understand that the alternative, attempting to force your recovery to fit a timeline and format that no longer serves the situation, is almost guaranteed to fail. Sometimes the greatest risk is trying to avoid all risks. Kiltharian closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Sarah saw something new there. Not just hope, but determination. Dr. Vasquez estimated several weeks for my recovery. How long would you need to arrange alternative negotiation formats? If I can get authorization from both the Human Federation and the Council Secretariat, about 3 weeks. It would mean missing the scheduled summit, but creating something potentially much more significant. And you believe the Council would accept such a proposal? Sarah smiled. The Council has been trying to establish meaningful contact with the Drachmarie for decades. If I present this as an opportunity for breakthrough rather than as a complication, I think they'll be very interested. Kiltharian began the laborious process of adjusting his position on the medical table, testing his renewed capabilities with careful, deliberate movements. Very well, Ambassador Chun. It appears that my mission is about to become something very different from what my people originally envisioned. Different doesn't mean less important, Sarah assured him. It might mean more important than anyone imagined. As she left the medical bay to begin the complex process of completely restructuring galactic diplomatic precedent, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange paths that led to crucial moments. They had set out to rescue a stranded ambassador, but they were about to attempt something that could reshape how civilizations thought about strength, adaptation, and the very nature of diplomatic engagement. The real question now wasn't whether Kiltharian could recover enough to complete his original mission. It was whether together they could create an entirely new model for what successful diplomacy could look like. 3 weeks later, the diplomatic conference facility on the neutral station Haven's Promise had been transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. Instead of the traditional massive assembly halls designed to accommodate hundreds of representatives in rigid hierarchical arrangements, the space now consisted of interconnected chambers of varying sizes, each designed for different types of interaction and communication. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in the central coordination hub, watching the final preparations with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were about to attempt something unprecedented, a diplomatic format that prioritized understanding over positioning, collaboration over dominance, and innovation over tradition. If it succeeded, it could revolutionize galactic politics. If it failed, it might set back interspecies cooperation by decades. Ambassador, the Drachmarie delegation has arrived at Docking Base 7, her aide Lieutenant Torres reported. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment of truth. For the past 3 weeks, she had worked tirelessly to convince both the Human Federation and the Council Secretariat that this new approach was worth the risk. The argument that had finally won approval was simple but powerful. Traditional diplomatic methods had failed to resolve the Drachmarie situation for nearly a century. It was time to try something different. Ambassador Kiltharian had spent the same 3 weeks in intensive recovery and preparation. Dr. Vasquez's treatment had been remarkably successful. He had regained functional mobility in all his limbs and partial flight capability, though he would never again achieve the effortless aerial mastery that had been his birthright. More importantly, He had used the recovery time to completely reimagine his approach to the diplomatic challenge ahead. Sarah made her way to the docking bay, accompanied by a small, welcoming committee that had been carefully chosen to represent the diversity of galactic civilization while avoiding the overwhelming crowds that traditional diplomatic arrivals involved. As the airlock cycled and the Drachmarie delegation emerged, she got her first glimpse of how profoundly things had changed. Keeltharian moved with deliberate care, using a mobility assistance device that was clearly of Drachmarie design, but incorporated principles that were obviously influenced by human adaptive technology. His gait was measured but confident, and most remarkably, he was not alone. Behind him came two other Drachmarie, one elderly female with faded scales and wing structures that showed signs of age-related mobility limitations, and one younger male whose left wing showed evidence of old injury that had healed in ways that prevented full extension. Ambassador Chun, Keeltharian said, his voice carrying new notes of confidence and purpose. I want you to meet Sub-Ambassador Thyroleth, our most experienced treaty negotiator, and cultural advisor Zephyros, our leading expert on interspecies psychology. I convinced our leadership that this new diplomatic approach would require perspectives that our traditional delegation structure had not previously valued. Sarah realized immediately what he had done. Instead of hiding his injuries and limitations as sources of shame, Keeltharian had openly acknowledged them, and then argued that successful engagement with galactic society required input from Drachmarie, who understood adaptation, limitation, and alternative approaches to traditional capabilities. He had essentially revolutionized Drachmarie diplomatic culture from within. We are honored to welcome you all to Haven's Promise, Sarah replied formally. Then, switched to a more personal tone. Keeltharian, how are you feeling about the days ahead? The Dragon Ambassador's expression carried a complex mixture of confidence and uncertainty, different from anything I have ever experienced. But after our conversations during my recovery, I have come to believe that different may be exactly what this situation requires. The welcoming ceremony was deliberately understated, designed to emphasize collaboration rather than hierarchy. As they made their way to the conference facilities, Sarah explained the structure they had developed for the negotiations. Instead of formal sessions where each delegation presents fixed positions, we've created what we're calling exploration chambers, spaces designed for collaborative examination of specific issues. Each chamber focuses on a different aspect of potential Drachmarie reintegration: resource sharing, cultural exchange, security cooperation, technological collaboration, and philosophical alignment. Sub-Ambassador Thyroleth moved with the aid of a sophisticated walking device that seemed to anticipate her needs, allowing her to maintain dignity and authority despite her physical limitations. This approach assumes that our people genuinely wish to find common ground rather than simply to defend predetermined positions. Does that assumption concern you? Sarah asked. The elderly Drachmarie considered this carefully. For most of my career, I believe that effective diplomacy required absolute certainty about desired outcomes. But recent years have taught me that absolute certainty often prevents us from discovering possibilities we never imagined. Cultural advisor Zephyros, who had remained quiet during the initial exchanges, spoke up as they entered the first exploration chamber. Ambassador Chun, may I ask about the selection of species representatives for these sessions? Traditional council gatherings operate on formal hierarchy and population-based representation. We approached this differently, Sarah explained, activating the chamber's holographic displays. For each exploration topic, we selected representatives based on expertise and perspective rather than political weight. The resource-sharing chamber includes the galaxy's most innovative economists and resource managers. The cultural exchange chamber brings together anthropologists, artists, and communication specialists. Each session is designed to bring together the beings most qualified to address specific challenges, regardless of their species' traditional diplomatic standing. As they toured the various chambers, Sarah watched Keeltharian's reactions carefully. She could see him processing not just the physical arrangements, but the underlying philosophy that informed every design choice. This wasn't diplomacy as performance or contest, it was diplomacy as genuine problem-solving collaboration. "There is something I need to tell you," Keeltharian said as they paused in the technology collaboration chamber. "When I returned to my people and proposed this alternative approach to our mission, the reaction was complex." Sarah felt a chill of concern. "What kind of reaction?" The traditional leadership was skeptical, as expected. The idea of abandoning proven diplomatic methods in favor of experimental collaboration seemed to many like embracing weakness. But there was also unexpected support from quarters I had not anticipated. Sub-Ambassador Thyroleth took up the explanation. Younger Drachmari, particularly those who work in fields requiring technological innovation, were intrigued by the possibility of engaging with galactic society in ways that emphasized problem-solving over dominance. More surprisingly, some of our military strategists argued that true strength comes from adaptability rather than from rigid adherence to ancient methods. The result, cultural advisor Zephyros added, is that we come here with a mandate that is both more limited and more expansive than originally intended. "More limited how?" Sarah asked. Keeltharian's expression grew serious. "We do not have authority to commit the Drachmari Collective to full reintegration with the Council. Too many of our people remain skeptical of galactic society's values and methods. And more expansive how? We have authorization to explore entirely new forms of engagement, relationships with galactic civilization that have never been attempted before. If we can demonstrate that interaction with other species can strengthen rather than diminish Drachmari capabilities and values, we may have opened a path to something far more significant than simple council membership." Sarah realized that the stakes had just become even higher than she had imagined. They weren't just attempting to bring the Drachmari back into existing galactic structures. They were potentially creating new models for how advanced civilizations could relate to each other. Over the following days, the exploration chambers buzzed with unprecedented activity. The resource-sharing sessions brought together economists from 12 different species to examine how the Drachmari's mineral wealth could be integrated with galactic trade networks in ways that benefited everyone while respecting Drachmari cultural values around territorial integrity. The Cultural Exchange Chamber featured artists and philosophers working to identify common values and compatible differences between Drachmari and galactic worldviews. But it was in the Philosophical Alignment Chamber that the most dramatic breakthrough occurred. The session brought together representatives from species that had struggled with similar issues around physical capability and social value. The crystalline beings whose distributed consciousness challenged traditional notions of individual identity. The aquatic delphinians whose mobility limitations in non-aquatic environments had historically marginalized them in council proceedings, and the collective intelligence hive species whose individual members had previously been dismissed as incomplete beings. "What we are discovering," reported Dr. Chen Wei, the xenopsychologist moderating the session, "is that the Drachmari concern about maintaining strength and capability is shared by many species, but the definition of what constitutes strength varies dramatically across cultures." Keeltharian, who had become the informal leader of the Drachmari delegation, found himself engaged in discussions that challenged every assumption he had held about strength, weakness, and the nature of successful civilization. "The Hive Queens are 12 has pointed out," he reported to Sarah during one of their daily coordination meetings, "that Drachmari emphasis on individual physical capability may actually represent a form of collective weakness. Overdependence on the physical perfection of single beings rather than the distributed resilience of community cooperation." "How are you processing that perspective?" Sarah asked. "With great difficulty," Keeltharian admitted, "but also with growing appreciation for the complexity of strength itself. When I was injured, I assumed I'd become weak. But participating in these discussions has required mental capabilities and adaptive thinking that I never developed when I relied primarily on physical dominance." The breakthrough came during the seventh day of negotiations, in a joint session that brought together representatives from all the exploration chambers. The question under discussion was simple. What would successful Drachmarie reintegration actually look like? Instead of the traditional approach of presenting predetermined positions and negotiating compromises, the session used a collaborative modeling process where each species contributed elements to a growing, complex picture of possibilities. What if, suggested the Delphinian representative, instead of asking the Drachmarie to adapt to existing council structures, the council evolved new structures that could accommodate Drachmarie values while also better serving other species with compatible concerns? The crystalline consciousness representative added, current council formats assume that effective representation requires individual beings making decisions based on limited perspective. But Drachmarie aerial culture suggests possibilities for three-dimensional decision-making that could enhance everyone's capabilities. Sub-Ambassador Thyroleth, who had initially been the most skeptical of the Drachmarie delegation, found herself building on these suggestions. Our people's understanding of territorial integrity and resource sovereignty might contribute to council approaches that better respect the autonomy of member species while still achieving beneficial cooperation. As the ideas built upon each other, Sarah watched something remarkable happening. Instead of negotiating predetermined positions, the participants were literally inventing new possibilities that none of them had imagined before the session began. What we're creating, Kiltharian said during a pause in the discussions, is not a plan for Drachmarie reintegration into galactic society as it exists, but a vision for how galactic society might evolve to become something that serves all of its members more effectively. The final sessions focused on practical implementation. How could these new approaches to interspecies cooperation be tested and gradually expanded? What safeguards could ensure that innovation didn't destabilize existing successful relationships? How could species that preferred traditional diplomatic methods coexist with those exploring new approaches? The answers that emerged were elegant in their simplicity. Instead of requiring all species to adopt new methods, the agreements established parallel systems, traditional council structures for routine business, and species that preferred familiar approaches, alongside experimental cooperation frameworks for civilizations interested in exploring new possibilities. The key insight, Dr. Chun Wei explained to the assembled representatives, is that diversity of approach strengthens the whole system. Species can participate in galactic civilization in ways that align with their values and capabilities, while still contributing to shared goals and mutual prosperity. When Ambassador Kiltharian presented the final agreements to his delegation, Sarah could see the transformation that had occurred over the previous weeks. The dragon ambassador who had begged for help because he couldn't walk or fly had become the architect of a diplomatic revolution that might reshape galactic politics for generations. The Drachmarie Collective will participate in these experimental cooperation frameworks for an initial period of 10 galactic standard years, he announced. We will retain our territorial sovereignty and cultural autonomy while contributing our unique perspectives and capabilities to collaborative projects with other species. But the most significant part of the announcement was what came next. Additionally, the Drachmarie Collective will establish the first Interspecies Adaptive Innovation Council, a permanent institution dedicated to developing new approaches to cooperation that accommodate the full spectrum of physical capabilities, cultural values, and social structures represented in galactic civilization. Sub-Ambassador Thyroleth added, this institution will be headquartered within Drachmarie territory, but will be jointly governed by representatives from species across the galaxy. Its mission will be to ensure that galactic society continues to evolve in ways that strengthen rather than diminish the unique contributions of all member civilizations. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the various delegations prepared to return to their home worlds, Sarah found herself alone with Kiltharian in the quiet of the central coordination hub. When I first heard your distress call, she said, I thought we were responding to a rescue mission. Kiltharian, who was moving more confidently now, though still with visible effort, turned to face her. And when I sent that call, I believed I was asking for help to complete a mission that my injury had made impossible. What do we call what actually happened? The Dragon Ambassador considered this for a long moment. I think we call it discovery. You discovered that helping a stranger could lead to transformation. I discovered that limitation could become innovation. Together, we discovered that the galaxy is far more capable of growth and adaptation than any of us had imagined. Sarah smiled. And the best part is this is just the beginning. The real work starts when we return to our respective peoples and begin implementing all these new possibilities. Indeed, though I suspect that work will be easier than we expect. After all, we've already proven that the most profound changes often begin with a simple decision to help someone who needs it. As the diplomatic station gradually emptied and normal space traffic resumed around Haven's Promise, Sarah reflected on the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. A distress call from an injured ambassador had become the catalyst for reimagining how civilizations could relate to each other. The rescue of one being had become the transformation of galactic society itself. Most remarkably, the Drachmae, who had once viewed physical limitation as weakness, had become the leaders in developing new understandings of strength that could benefit every species in the galaxy. Keeltharian's injury, which had seemed like a catastrophic end to his diplomatic career, had instead become the beginning of the most successful diplomatic initiative in recent galactic history. The final report that Sarah submitted to the Human Federation concluded with a simple observation. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from avoiding limitation, but from discovering what becomes possible when we learn to see limitation as opportunity for innovation. 6 months later, the first projects sponsored by the Interspecies Adaptive Innovation Council were already showing remarkable results. New technologies that accommodated diverse physical capabilities were revolutionizing transportation and communication across the galaxy. Cultural exchange programs were breaking down barriers that had persisted for centuries. Most importantly, species that had previously felt marginalized or inadequately represented in galactic society were finding new ways to contribute their unique perspectives and capabilities. Ambassador Keeltharian had returned to the Drachmae Collective not as a broken diplomat who had failed to complete his mission, but as the herald of a new era in galactic cooperation. His injury had healed to the extent that Dr. Vasquez's techniques allowed, but more importantly, his understanding of strength and capability had evolved in ways that were transforming his entire civilization. The galaxy was learning that true strength came not from uniform excellence, but from diverse capabilities working together in creative harmony. And it had all begun with a simple distress call and the radical decision to help a stranger among the stars. In the end, the paralyzed dragon diplomat had flown higher than he ever had before, not through the power of wings, but through the limitless possibilities that opened when beings chose compassion over caution, innovation over tradition, and collaboration over domination. The galaxy would never be quite the same, and that was exactly what it had needed all along.